up here. So this is from your textbook, and the chapter 28 is on income inequality, and we spent some time with various videos yesterday, and looking at a little bit of data in different ways. So off to the left here is the United States income broke down into these quintiles. So they simply take the United States and break it into the bottom 20%, the top 20%, and then so on and so forth, right, in between. So it's broken into this to look at the income distribution. And so in 1970, just looking at the income share, this says that the bottom 20% had 5% of the income for the nation. The top 20% had 40% of the income. Okay, so let's get some of this in your notes too, because we'll kind of build on this as we go here. So, we can use quintiles to look at the distribution of income. So, what does this mean? Let's break down income for the nation into 20% chunks. Not chunks, chunks. So from this example, so 1970, we've got the 20% of the population, and this is really population of, and this one's families, so there's a little distinction between families and households. 20% of the population of families, I'm trying to do population of families, earned .4% of the nation's total income. And so then the top 20% earn 40.9% of the total income. Okay, so any questions on the interpretation? Because we'll use this quite a bit in this chapter, looking at these quintiles. All right. So this next part here shows 2018 in green. And so from that, what looks like happened to income inequality? Did it get bigger or smaller from 1970? Bigger, right? So we got 3.8 for the bottom 20% and 49.4 for the highest. And then we've got the distributions in between. So we can start to kind of think, well, what's happening to distribution that way through that lens? The next panel over to the right has transfer payments taken into account. So we talked about transfer payments way back when. Transfer payments. give me some examples of transfer payments. Give me some that we do to help the poor. Give me one. Federal program. Social Security would be one. So Social Security, not necessarily for the poor in that case. Social Security. EBT is the food stamps. Yeah. So food security type programs. They call them stamps because back in the old days you actually had a stamp that you would give. So that, but food payments now have become with the EBT card. So we got Social Security, food stamps, welfare programs, Medicare, Medicaid. So basically, what I call Robin Hood stuff, you're taking from one person and giving to another. You're transferring money or income from one person to the next through tax and transfer. So unemployment insurance is the other one that we should list here. Especially, some people, if you get unemployed, then you have kind of a need-based thing there. So unemployment insurance. All right, so those are just some examples, but anytime the government takes money through taxes and distributes it somewhere else, in general, that's a transfer payment. Okay, so this bar then takes into account transfer payments. So before the transfer payments, we've got the 3.8 and here 54.3. This was for, I think, 2016. Because the data was a little bit different. This one was 2018, so it's kind of similar. But then take from the rich, give to the poor is part of the transfer program. And so after we adjust for that, then the difference has shrank between the rich and the poor. And so a lot of times inequality statistics, depending on which one you're looking at, will focus in on the before tax because it's common to do. But we do have a tax and transfer system that is having some success at reducing the gap. Does that make sense? Okay, any questions on that? So the big thing I have that I care about is the well-being of the poor. We'll talk about poverty level poor, which is even less than the bottom 20%. And to see what their welfare is like. And so you've heard this thing about the pie, right? So they talk about, I think the videos yesterday, and maybe we've talked about it even in previous chapters, about the economic pie. So the wealth of the nation, or the income of the nation, being about $23 trillion. We can kind of think about that being the total income, and then we get into, carving that up, so to speak. And so the argument made for ways to help the poor is to have a bigger pie. So how can we have a nation that has more pie to split up than less pie? And so I did a little back of the envelope on this one. This is a little Russ McCullough back of the envelope connection here, because I did a little bit of look. So in 1970, real GDP for the nation was 1.1 trillion, and here in 2018 it's 20 trillion. So the pie, in my pie analogy, has grown over this pretty lengthy period of time here, right? Almost 50 years, from 1 trillion to 20 trillion. Now, has the population grown too? Of course, right? So the population's growing, so we got a number of different things moving on. That's why we look at per capita statistics sometimes. So then I looked at the bottom share in 1970 was 5.4% of the 1 trillion, gives you 57.9 billion. So I took the 5.4% and said the bottom quintile, the bottom 20%, was having 57.9 billion, and the bottom in 2018, with a smaller cut of 20 trillion, had 783 billion. You with me so far? The population of the United States in 1970 was 205 million. The population in 2018 grew to 327 million. And so 20% of the individuals represents 41 million people. And 20% of the larger population is 65 million people. And now if we calculate the income per person in both years relative to the position of the bottom 20%, it's $1,412 versus $12,000. And this has been accounted for inflation because, and we're not in macro yet, but I used real GDP, so we're accounting for inflation. So yes, we have a drop in the 3.8, but the well-being, the purchasing power of the bottom 20% has increased quite a bit in terms of the number of goods and things that their income can buy in the bottom 20%. So I think this is a reflection of thinking about the size of the pie. So if you have a smaller piece of pie, that seems bad on the front end, but if we look at how it's evolved over time, we've got more pie. And so we have a bigger gap, but the welfare of the bottom 20% is significantly higher in purchasing power. Questions or comments, Aaron? Okay. Let's see, what did I want to do next? So factors that, let's get rid of this for a second. Factors that influence income inequality. Do you guys think you're in the bottom 20% or top 20% right now? What's your gut feeling with if you are working your part-time job? Think you're in the bottom 20 or the top 20 or somewhere in the middle? How many of you think you're probably in the bottom 20? Right? So that's one of the factors that affect income distribution. So let's think about income distribution through time. So income distribution over time. Okay, so let's look at you. How about you? Or hopefully a plan for you, a hypothetical you. So currently, while you're in college, let's say you're working for $15,000 a year doing some sort of part-time job while you're going to college. Once you graduate, you get that first entry-level job as a new graduate, still need to prove yourself. First job after graduation, you jump up more than double, right? More than double of what you were making as a college student. Turns out you kick ass in the job market, and so mid-career, you're making $70,000. And then you retire, and you've been doing some stuff that your personal finance professor taught you, and so you've got a nice savings built up. And so when you retire, your savings and maybe some other things are bringing in $40,000 a year worth of income from your 401k and your 403, other retirement savings that you did. So, at any given point in time, we have the population moving through this process, right? And so if we take 2018, or let's take 2024, since we're in 2024, you guys are currently in this stage. But in 2024, I have economics graduates, some of my first ones, that are now down here. Same as you guys, right? Potentially. And so they are in somewhere in the middle of the income distribution, but it's the same person. So what sometimes gets overlooked in the income inequality data is this process of moving through what we'll do some stuff here with income mobility, your ability to move through. And some of it is just natural process of acquiring human capital and then moving through the process. So the key point with this at a given year, there are college graduates like you in each of, or in, I should say not in each, but in different quintiles. And this is not bad. It is a natural, expected thing to happen in a healthy economy. Okay, questions or comments there? All right, so why have we seen some increases? So economists have, why has there been increases over time? No matter how you slice it, it hasn't gone down. Again, I question how valuable. I think it's good to know, but I don't know how valuable the minding the gap is, so to speak. Why have there been increases over time? Number one is single versus dual income households. Single versus dual income households. So if we go way back to the 50s, we mostly had single earner households. And as we move into the 2000s, we have divorce rates high, and often we might still have one worker, but one worker's paying child support while the other person does some part-time work to watch the kids, right? And so that effect is going to contribute to inequality. So for example, in the 50s, mostly single earner households. So in the 2000s, we have single person households due to divorce with one parent keeping part-time work part-time work while raising children, and other parent working and paying, hopefully paying, child support. So the more households that look like that, the greater the income inequality is going to look. So kind of a cultural thing that way. Any questions or comments there? Okay, the other one, we talked about less skilled and more skilled work. So number 2, differences in low and high skill work. Again, if we go back in time in the 1950s and 60s, we had less high skill jobs relative to low skill jobs. So in the 1950s, low skill jobs were a larger fraction of total jobs. In the 2000s, technology and innovation causes a demand for more high skill jobs as a fraction of total. Who made more money, 1950s baseball players and golfers, or in the 2000s? 2000s, right? So that's been a change in a number of different areas. We could go to Hollywood too. Your textbook called that the tournament, kind of winner-take-all tournament style pay that has gone on and evolved over time. So kind of the winner take all evolution in sports and Hollywood causes very high pay for the best, and probably a best, if they're still playing, modest pay for the less skilled. So, you know, people might go to Hollywood thinking, oh man, that'd be great to make $10 million a year. Did you hear him how much this actress is making or this actor is making? But if we look at them as a pool of all the actors, there's just a few of them at the top, right? Making the 10 million, the A-list actors and entertainers. I guess I could have put Hollywood and let's just put entertainment. Taylor Swift. There's lots of singers out there that earn a living playing in bars, making 30, 40,000, 50,000 a year, right? So they can maybe make enough to make a living and they're decent and people come to see them, but it's not the 10 million. So that has caused some income inequality as well, or a contributor to it. All right, and then number 4 is lower tax rates for high income earners. Now this one's a little bit strange because what happened in the 50s when tax rates were potentially in the 70, 60, 70% for the high income earners again, then the rich would find ways to shelter that income through either IRS, regulations that were totally lawful, that they were able to do some sort of deductions, or moving stuff overseas and kind of hiding their money, right? And so by bringing more money above board, lower rates in 2000s, parentheses, let's just put 39.5%. So if you consider that low, but these are people making a lot of money, right? So this is, Taylor Swift is paying close to that for sure, and most of our real talented, actually probably any professional athletes are rubbing up against that bracket. But lower rates in the 2000s causes more income to be observable. Claimed as income. So if we look at somebody's income that was rich in the high tax rate days in the 60s, 70s, or whatever, they on paper looked like they were getting paid less, but it was because of the sheltering and loopholes and stuff that they were moving around. Okay, any questions on those? Yeah.
Are there any studies you just calculate that is, or is that just something that
Of this here?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the text, there's references to the tax rates, and this is just in terms of the income, how much came above board.
Are there like besides just the text reference studies?
Yes. Yep. All right. So the next thing I want to look at is spending inequality. So let's say an alternative to income inequality is expenditure, spending inequality. Now this might seem kind of weird, but there's data on spending that goes on. And so this can, some economists argue, might reflect better the underlying inequality because it can start to get rid of the college kid thing that I was talking about. What are you guys doing, or a lot of you doing, now to go to college? How do you afford to do it? Loans, right? And so you do what economists call income smoothing. So right now, you're taking out loans, and young people do this in general, right? So if you're in your 20s, you got that first job, you're like, wow, I'd really like to buy a brand new car, but I don't have the money, but hey, I just got this new job and it looks promising and the data shows that I'm gonna be making $70,000 in 10 years or whatever, right? And so you borrow today to bump up your spending today, even though your income doesn't justify it if you were to pay cash. And so then you smooth out your spending over time through borrowing. So let's write that down. So expenditures tend to be smoother over time due to borrowing. So, I guess I'll put that little example here. So, college and first job in your 20s allows you to borrow funds. And consume at levels higher than your income. So economists call this consumption smoothing. Consumption smoothing. All right, so one of the techniques then to use this, one technique to measure this is the 90-10 ratio, expenditure ratio. So, for example, suppose that the income of somebody in the 90th percentile, so assume income of a person in the 90th percentile, so this is the high income person, is $100,000. Oh, and I'm sorry, I put the word income in there, just even in your notes. Cross that off, spending. the person is in the 90th percentile of income. So the spending of the person in the 90th percentile of income, of earnings, is 100,000. So we're still trying to get this kind of high income, low income, but we're getting at it through their spending rather than their consumption. So, and the 10th percentile person is 20,000. So we got the higher income earner, the lower income earner. So then this 90-10 expenditure ratio, the 90-10 expenditure ratio, let's call it a 90-10 equals 100,000. The income of the 90th, or the spending of the 90th percentile person divided by the spending of the 10th percentile person. And that ends up being 5 using my numbers that I did. Okay, any questions on the setup so far? All right, so now, how can expenditure inequality grow? So let's look at this ratio using my numbers. What would need to happen to the ratio to make inequality grow, that the rich are spending more than the poor? How would you make a bigger gap? How would we make this change? Which one needs to get bigger? Tim? The top one. So if the top one gets bigger, if this changes to 200,000, then this becomes a 10, right? So inequality is getting worse if that goes up. So this number going up. Now, how else can this number go up, though? Tim, go ahead, Jesse. I think you said it. The bottom goes down, right? So if this one drops to 10, if this one drops to 10,000, then 100,000 divided by 10,000 is also 10, right? So you with me? So we got kind of two different ways, and of course they're going to both move over time. So how can inequality grow? So kind of two ways. An increase in the expenditure of the 90th person, or a decrease in the expenditures of the 10th percentile person. All right, so that is that. So we'll look at some information on that here in a bit. Get this thing fired up. Okay, so here's some things, characteristics of high income and low income families. So in this table, the textbook's got, if I can go one more higher. Yeah, looks like we can make that up. So education of the householder, percent with less than high school. Bottom 20%, 22%. And only 2% of the top 20. So the top quintile is 20%. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention with this is, because it surprised me, to be honest with you. How much income do you think the top 20% people are making? In other words, let me frame it a little differently. If to make it into the top 20%, you're feeling like, oh yeah, I'm doing pretty good, right? So what income do you think you need to get to be in the top 20% of Americans? Tim?
90, 100,000.
Really? Okay. Millions? 90, 100,000. Couple hundred thousand? Yeah, like how much income? You can think about your parents maybe. Like, are they in the top 20% or there's no way? Are they just kind of middle income, middle class, you know? So they make, the German says 100,000, 90 to 100,000. What do you think? 500,000? 200,000? Top 20%? Couple hundred grand? All right, so that, I actually had to look this up because I didn't know, and I was actually kind of surprised. In 2020, and this is just what I looked up then, so I haven't re-looked it up. The top 1% is Jesse's. If you're in the top 1% of income earners, to make it to the top 1%, you got to be at 824, I think is my number there. In the USA, though, to enter the 20% is 131,000. Now, and this is of households, so is that too crazy to think mom and dad combined are making 131? I bet some of you have moms and dads that are at 131. So one has a $70,000 a year job, the other one has a $60,000 a year job, right? So to get up to there, it kind of surprised me that it wasn't as high. I was thinking it had to be probably 200 to 500,000 was my gut feeling. And then Kansas is even better, 117. You're in the top 20% of income earners in Kansas, the great state of Kansas, if you're at 117. Okay, so with that said, my point in bringing that up is that you don't have to be in the super rich category. We're not driving Lamborghinis and everything. If you're in the top 20%, it could be a pretty normal looking family that's earning that amount. All right, so let's see, we've got education, college degree. So now we start to see the payoff to college perhaps, right? 69% we jump to from 14% down here. So there are still some college degree or more that are in this bottom 20%. That could be a recent college graduate though, right? If we go back to kind of our analysis of how we calculate the bottom and the top. So some of that number could be that. Age of the householder, percent distribution. So under 35, 35 to 64, 65 and older. Top 20%, under 35, 74%. So the lion's share of the top 20%, 74% of those people are in this 35, the working age years. 35 to 64 is what we call the working age years. Married couple, percent of the total. So this might be picking up what we said before on single households versus dual income households, right? So it's a lot easier to get up to 131 if you got two income earners, with one less so. Single parent family, so we've got 53 and 8, a little bit more difficult. Persons per family, actually bigger families in the top 20%. And then the number of earners and the number of workers. So look at the number of work hours, percent of number of earners in the family, 64% versus 9. Which kind of makes sense. That's part of at least contributing to the reason the number of work hours. All right, so that is that. That looks like a good spot to wrap for today, and we'll pick up there tomorrow.